The purpose of life has two parts: why God created us, what's in it for Him, and why are we here, what does He want of us? The first question is high mystery. We may never know the answer. The second question is the key to life, and we must know the answer. We are here to make this world a home for God. The instructions for this are given very clearly in Torah. How to make every experience godly by turning the physical into something higher, making a home for God in this world. The question, why am I here, assumes purpose in creation, that God created us with a specific purpose. So why do I have life? Why do I have an identity as a Jew? Why do I have a personality? Why do I have a gender? Mitzvahs address all the questions.
Do you imagine being surprised or overwhelmed if you would see a poster saying a lecture on who created the world, and that the lecture was going to last only a half hour? I say, that's amazing. Somebody can discuss creation of the world and who created it in less than a half hour? Unbelievable. Truth of the matter is, it's no great deal at all. Matter of fact, it shouldn't take a half hour. Who created the world? God created the world. You can all go home now. The same is true with the purpose of life. Why is the purpose of life? And why does that sound so dramatic and so overwhelming and so mysterious and poetic and philosophical that you can't possibly fit it into 45 minutes? Obviously, that's not a very Jewish perspective. From a Jewish perspective, purpose of life, everybody knows that. Ask any kid in Cheder. And yet, because of the secular philosophies, purpose of life has become an eternal mystery. And we're constantly searching for the purpose in life. Part of the problem is that the question is more enticing than the answer. The search is more fun than the finding, because the drama of it and the agony of it and the quest itself fulfills some need or some desire that we have that the answer does not fulfill. So the search or the questioning, the seeking, is not a preparation for the answer, because the answer comes to satisfy one set of needs while the seeking satisfies a different set of needs. Ideally, we grow as we seek and as we search and as we learn and as we find out what the answers are to our questions. We not only gain more information and find out more stuff, but we actually move, we grow from the set of desires or needs that the seeking finds satisfying to those needs and those desires that the answer satisfies. At other times, when things are not ideal, we get stuck. And those needs and those desires that are satisfied by the seeking and by the searching refuse to go away. And we don't grow out of them. They linger. We're stuck with them. And the agony of it, of what is the purpose in life? What am I here for? What is this all about? Goes on and on and on without any end in sight. And then you begin to wonder, is this a philosophical question anymore? Or has it become some kind of a fixation? Has it simply become fun to wallow in the agony of not knowing, in the mystery of what life is all about? Sometimes it also serves as an excuse. I can't do what I have to do. I haven't gotten around to doing what I have to do because I don't even know what the purpose of life is. And as long as I don't know what the purpose of life is, how you expect me to get things done, to go about my business? I don't know if the analogy is necessarily a correct one, but the holy and inspired and enlightened teachers or philosophers of the East who sit in their retreats and meditate while people around them are being assassinated or are dying from hunger, from abuse or whatever, and they feel justified based on their philosophy and on their beliefs and so on, they feel justified to continue sitting and seeking meaning and enlightenment while people around them are dying. So why aren't you out there feeding the poor? I don't mean stop starvation all over the world. Nothing as cosmic as that. But the guy right next to you, your first cousin, he's dying from hunger. Why don't you go help him? Say, go help him. I'm looking for enlightenment. I'm busy with the purpose of life. I can't be distracted by somebody's hunger or somebody's need for food, which is really animalistic anyway. And wouldn't we all be better off if we didn't have to eat and we could just fast? So I should put aside my meditation and my quest for enlightenment to feed somebody's empty stomach? To some degree, in the Western world, finding ourselves, finding the purpose of life, figuring it all out, is often also an escape from responsibility. So what if somebody's hurt? So what if somebody's money or property is damaged? I'm in the pursuit of the purpose of life. And that justifies a lot of things. What really is the purpose of life? The question really has two parts. The truly theological, philosophical part of the question is, what is God's purpose in life? What was the purpose for God? What benefit does God have? What does God gain by creating the world and by giving us life? Well, that's truly a theological question because you're trying to figure out what makes God tick. A less theological question is, what is our purpose in life? In other words, not what is it that God gets from us by creating us, but what is it that God created us for? In other words, what is our function in life? Not why does God want that and what does he stand to gain by our doing that? So it's not what does God get from us, but what does God want from us? And even after we've answered the question of what it is that God wants of us, the question will still remain, why would God want that? Whatever the answer is, the question will still be, but why does God need that? Why would God want that? What is God going to get from that? What does he gain if we do that? And that second half of the question may very well remain a question, because what God gets from it may not be understandable or within reach of human reason, which wouldn't be surprising at all. We really don't know what we get by half the things that we do, and we can't figure out our own motivations. To figure out God's motivation is too ambitious. So we don't know what God gets from creation, unless we're going to get into Kabbalah and study it for many years. But is that really a necessary and relevant piece of information? Probably not. As a matter of fact, part of Jewish virtue is that goodness doesn't need to be justified. Being good doesn't need a justification. So that if someone comes along and says, would you please help me? I need someone to talk to. I need someone to talk to. Now, you can either offer your ear and listen, or you can say, well, why do you need someone to talk to? What will you get from having someone to talk to? And what's going to be after you've talked? And if you can't explain it, then I'm not going to do it. That's certainly not a Jewish attitude. As a matter of fact, we've heard the argument many times. I'm not sure where it begins or where it comes from, but the argument against tzedakah, an actual position, a philosophical position against anti-tzedakah, because by giving charity you encourage people to become parasites. If a guy doesn't have money, let him go out and work. What do you mean you're giving him? Don't give. Let him go and work. He can't find a job, well, what's his problem? But there's no such thing as tzedakah. There are no handouts. That's certainly not a Jewish attitude. If someone comes along and says, I am hungry, feed me, you don't ask, why are you hungry? And how did you get to be hungry? And where is the money you should have been earning from? First you feed him. Then you can discuss anything you want to discuss. Which means basically that virtue, being good, being nice, being helpful, being moral, doesn't need a justification. When God says, do this, for this I created you, we don't need further justification. And that's why the Alter Rebbe said, in this often quoted statement, if God had commanded us, instead of to do this mitzvah, had he commanded us to simply chop wood all day long, we would do it with the same enthusiasm. Because it's not the significance of the mitzvah that inspires us to do it. It's the fact that we were commanded to do it. It is a moral obligation. If it's a moral obligation, then we do it. What benefit comes from morality? That's an immoral question. The mitzvah is an end in itself. It doesn't need further justification. In other words, the purpose for which God created us doesn't need to be supported by further purpose. If we're doing what God wants us to do, then no further question is necessary. To know that you're doing what God wants you to do does not need philosophical support. It doesn't need to be bolstered or embellished by any further reasons. Because what could be a further reason? Listen to this circular argument. God asks us to keep Shabbos. Well, God created the world. It's His world. We are His creation. He asks us to keep Shabbos. We'll keep Shabbos. Why? Because obviously it means a lot to Him. And since it means a lot to Him, we're going to do it. Why does it mean a lot to Him? Because when people rest on Shabbos, as the argument goes, they are better able or better equipped to handle the rest of the week. Because having a day off, it's sociologically and economically and politically a very good thing. As a matter of fact, Moshe was able to convince Pharaoh in the times when the Jews were slaves in Egypt that the slaves should have off one day a week. Not out of kindness to the slave, but out of consideration of economic benefit. You simply will get more done with slaves who have had a day of rest than slaves who are too tired to lift a stone. And even Pharaoh was convinced. And so Jews in Egypt did not work on Shabbos. Because Moshe happened to suggest that Shabbos would be a good day to give them off. And no one was the wiser because the commandment hadn't been given yet. So Pharaoh wasn't going to realize that that was a mitzvah. To him, Shabbos was like any other day. So even Pharaoh was convinced that it was economically advantageous to give people a day off. And so God, in consideration and in kindness, wants us to have a day off. So now why are we having a day off? Well, we're doing it because God said so. Why did God say so? Because it's better for us. So why are we now keeping Shabbos? So what we've done is by trying to embellish, by trying to improve, by saying I'm not only doing it because God told me to, I also know why God told me to. So now why am I doing it? I'm doing it because it's better for me. So instead of improving, I've come full circle. I'm back to myself again. I'm back to doing what I want, what's good for me. So what do I need God for? It was an unnecessary step. So I believe in God and I read the Torah and I find out about Shabbos for what? To come back to the conclusion that it's good for me to get a day off. That's circular reasoning, non-productive reasoning. Or another thing, to say, why do I have to do this just because God said so? We spoke about this last week also. Just because God said so I have to do it? Yes, because if you're a guest in somebody's house and they ask you to do something, it's only polite to do it. And since this is God's world, you have to do what God said because... Why because? Because it is the right thing to do. Which is again circular reasoning. What makes it the right thing to do? Because God said so. Why is anything right? Because God said so. There are very knowledgeable Jews, scholarly Jews, who will make the same argument. We do what God tells us to do because by doing it, it makes us better. It makes us better people. And the reason they'll say this, the reason they'll give you this argument is because they're quoting the Gemara. The Gemara says that mitzvahs were given to improve the person. And so they're telling you that the reason we do the mitzvahs is because it improves us. It makes us better people, which is really an incorrect understanding of the Gemara. Again, to say that we're going to do what God commands us to do. Why? Because that will make us better people. How better people? What's better? We won't steal, but that's one of the commandments. By doing the commandment, we will become better people. We won't commit adultery. Wait a minute, that's one of the commandments. So what does it mean? That by not stealing and by not committing adultery, we will become better people. In what? In that we will not steal and not... There's something wrong with this reasoning here. Don't steal so that you'll be a better person. How will I be a better person? You won't be a crook. In other words, I won't steal. Well, you're making an unnecessary argument here. Don't steal so that you won't steal? That doesn't sound very philosophical. Don't commit adultery because then you won't be an adulterer. That's true, but unnecessary. That doesn't have to be stated. It's rather obvious. So, obey the commandments, because by obeying the commandments you will become a better person. What is a better person if not obeying the commandments? There is nothing better. So it's not correct to say that we don't commit adultery in order to become better. Better than what? The point of it being that the commandment doesn't have any further justification because there is nothing better. So there is no greater virtue to be had than the mitzvah itself. And so to say that the mitzvahs were given in order that we would become better, it's redundant. Because better means obeying the mitzvah. There is nothing better than that. What the Gemara really is saying is not, why is there this commandment? There is this commandment because this is true. The question is, why were these commandments given to us, to human beings? Since human beings are imperfect, and human beings have flaws, and human beings have evil inclinations, why give us such holy and true and divine commandments? For that, the answer is to make us better, to stop us from being all those nasty things. But that's not why there are commandments. That's not why God wants us to keep kosher. God wants kosher. The question is, why does he want it of us rather than of angels? For this, the answer is because it helps us. But that's not why kashrus exists. That's not why Shabbos exists. That's not why tznius exists. That's why it was given to us in spite of our weaknesses. But why really is there such a commandment? Why does God want Shabbos? Why does God want kashrus? We don't know and we don't care. Because knowing isn't going to make it any better. Because you can't get any better. But that's all introductory stuff. What really is the purpose of life? There's a statement in Gemara that says that the sages took a vote and they tallied it up, and it was agreed, either by majority or unanimous, it was agreed that it is easy, that it is nayach lo adam shalei baris, that it would be preferable for the person not to be born. Because life is difficult. Life is a struggle. As the Gemara says, a person was created to labor, to strive, to struggle. Life is not easy. And therefore the Gemara says that the sages agree that it would be easier, more convenient for a person not to be born. But in spite of it, now that we are born, we do exist, we will strive and do what we have to do and be good. Chassidus explains the difference between easier and better. It's true that it would be easier for a person not to be born. But that doesn't make it better. It is better for a person to be born. It would be easier not to be born. But then again, nothing good comes easily. So no, it's not easy to be born, to be alive, but it is good. And because of that goodness, we not only accept our life, but we become quite enamored with it. And the thought of losing it is very upsetting. The foundation, the groundwork on which we have to build an understanding of a purpose of life is the absolute conviction that when God creates human beings, He does not create them in masses. Probably the most important lesson out of the entire description of creation, the fact that God created light, and the fact that God created grass, and the fact that God put the moon and the stars and the sun in their orbits and so on, is not nearly as relevant and as important and as significant to our lives as the fact that God created one person. That, more than anything else, sets the tone for our life. We have to begin with the absolute conviction that God does not create groups of people. He only creates individuals. So that every life, every soul that comes down into a body is hand-chosen, hand-picked. It's not that this particular corner of the world needs to be heavily populated, and so many people are born. And some other corner of the world God wants to populate more sparingly, then He creates less people are born there. It doesn't go in groups, and it's not a wholesale thing. Every individual is created because that individual has a mission, a purpose, a function that no one else has. Without that conviction, nothing we say about the purpose of life will have any meaning at all. Because if I was created as part of a group, as part of a mass creation, then no matter what purpose life has, it eludes me. Because it doesn't explain why I'm here. There may be some purpose to life which is out of reach. There may be a purpose to life, but not to my life. Because I was created as part of a group. And so me as an individual, I have no purpose. So we have to begin with this absolute conviction that every person's life is unique. Now that we have that conviction, that I exist because I am meant to exist. I was born because God needed to create me, and so He did. Now I can legitimately ask the question, why? What's the purpose? But if I don't assume a purposeful creation, then I cannot ask for a purpose after the fact. And that's where in the secular world, we again make this terrible mistake of choosing a purpose, which is totally inconsistent. You can't choose a purpose. Purpose means the reason, the motivation, the cause that brought you into existence, that made you exist in the first place. To say, I was created and born, I don't know why, but my purpose in life is to be a doctor. It doesn't make sense. That's not your purpose in life. That's your purpose in your profession, in your means of livelihood. It is not your purpose in life because your life preceded this purpose. You were alive for 20 years before you decided to be a doctor. So obviously being a doctor does not constitute a purpose for your life. So when we talk about purpose, it has to precede our existence. The purpose must exist before we do. Then it can be the purpose of our life. But if it comes after we exist, then it's only an excuse for life. It's not a purpose. And although that too is positive, to say, look, I don't know why I'm alive, but as long as I'm alive, I might as well make something of it. That's fine. But don't call that purpose of life. Call that sense of usefulness, not sense of purpose. Because again, the reasoning breaks down. It is your purpose in life to be a doctor? Why? Well, to help people. Why do you want to help people? That's the end of the road. What's so good about helping people? And besides, if the only good thing in life is to help people, then we're all a bunch of misfits. We're running around helping each other. What's the point? Everybody would become a doctor. Because that's the only purpose in life, is to help somebody else. God forbid problems should end. We'd all be in trouble. If all of a sudden nobody had a problem, there'd be no purpose in life. Because who is there to help now? And if that's our reasoning, isn't it possible that we purposely, maybe unconsciously, but purposely go around creating problems? Because we don't want to lose our purpose in life. And if we don't actually create the problems, at least we seek them out. We go looking under every rock to see if we can't find the problem, to give our life some purpose. If your whole life is correcting what is wrong, then what happens to life when life is what it really ought to be? It's an incredible contradiction. When we finally become what we ought to be, we will have no purpose for being. That's terrible. It's also not true. So to say that our purpose in life is to be a doctor because it helps somebody else, what's right with helping somebody else? Helping somebody else is right because God said so. God also said not to eat out when the restaurant isn't kosher. So yeah, but who does that help? So since when is helping someone the only yardstick of morality? Morality means doing that which you are meant to do. And that's what explains why the Torah says, after giving the commandments, Torah says, from these commandments you may not detract, subtract, and you may not add. What would be so terrible if we added a few commandments? What would be so terrible if we saw an opportunity to do some good, and we did that good even though it's not a commandment? It's true that there is no good in the world that is not already a commandment. But what if there was? What would be so terrible if we could find something to add to Torah and be even better? What would be so terrible? What would be terrible is, what do you mean you're adding? The whole goodness and truth and virtue of Torah is that you're doing that which you are meant to do. And how do you know what you're meant to do? Because that's what it says in Torah. But what does it mean we would add another mitzvah? What's the virtue in that? Is that what you were meant to do? If not, it's not a virtue. So, well, it sounds nice. But it doesn't make it a virtue. And that's why you can't add goodness. You can't add to Torah. Because Torah is what you were meant to do. You can't add to what you were meant to do. So yeah, but it's a good thing to do. It may be good, but it's not what you were meant to do. And therefore, it's not a virtue to add it. So you can't subtract from it. You can't do less than you were meant to do. You also can't do more, because there is no more. And to do something other than what you were meant to do, there's no virtue to that. Virtue means doing that which you were sent to do. If a person appoints a messenger to do something for him, there are many cases where the messenger's doing it is counted as if you did it yourself. If the guy changes it a little bit from what you told him to do, He did a little less than what you told him to do. Is the part that he did do counted as if you did it? Or did he stop being your messenger by not doing what you told him to do? He broke the bond that existed between you, and he no longer represents you because he's not doing exactly what you told him to do, because he's doing less. What if the messenger did more than you asked him to do? Is he still your messenger? Is what he does still counted on your account? And the same is true with all of us. Being God's messenger, what if we do less than what God wants of us? Are we doing what we were meant to do? What we were sent to do? And then, what if we do more? That too could be breaking our bond, breaking the agreement. God sent us to do such and such, and we're doing more. In other words, we're not doing what he sent us to do, we're doing what we want to do. And we want to do more. So all of a sudden, we're acting as free agents, no longer as messengers. So, what is the purpose in life? All mankind was created, as the Torah says, to work this world and to guard this world. And that's what Adam and Eve were told when they were placed in the Garden of Eden. To guard it and to work it. Which means two things. This world is partly good and partly bad. There is goodness in the world, there's evil in the world. What is our purpose in life? Our purpose in life is to guard that which is good in the world and to work at improving that which is bad in the world, that which needs to be improved. That's the purpose in life. What is good in this world that needs to be guarded, and what is bad in this world that needs to be changed? For this we have Torah, an instruction booklet. This you shall do and this you should not do. This is good and this is bad. And now you know, protect and nurture what is good and fix and change what is bad. That's your purpose in life. That's everybody's purpose in life. So, have you lived up to your purpose? Have you nurtured that which is good? Or have you neglected it? Have you fixed that which was wrong? Or have you indulged in it? What do we gain by doing this? The world will gain. The world was an abandoned place, like a field without an owner. The weeds overrun the place. It looks neglected. It's not productive. People come along and work at it, and they clear away the weeds, and they plant the right kinds of things. It becomes a beautiful garden. So the world gains. But what do we gain? What do we gain from doing this? What are our wages for this service, for this purpose in life? And although it's true that if we were very high-minded, we wouldn't ask for reward, and we wouldn't ask for payment. But on the other hand, if God is expecting us to do this, whether or not we are high-minded, then there must be a payment as well. God can say, don't do it for the reward, but he must offer a reward. Because not everybody is going to be high-minded. And for God to force us to be high-minded isn't very just. So the Mishnah instructs us not to serve God like a servant who wants to get paid, but like a servant who doesn't want to get paid. That's good advice. But we're not forced. There is a reward. And if we want to do it for the reward, we can. Only it's not the best way of doing it. It's not the highest way of doing it. What is the reward? The reward in this world is that we stop feeling like guests in somebody else's world. Why couldn't God finish the world himself and put us into the world after it was perfect? Why give us a purpose at all? Trees don't have purpose. Birds don't have purpose. They just are. They do their thing. They don't need to know their purpose. They serve out their function unknowingly, unconsciously. Why do we have to be conscious of our purpose and responsible to either do or not do that which you were created to do? Because if we did it unconsciously, it wouldn't be our world. We wouldn't be able to feel any part of this world. We would be a cog in the machine. And so God doesn't finish the world. He leaves it imperfect and says, when he creates man, you are different from other creations. You are not there as the end or the fulfillment of what I want, but here you can put in also what you want by doing or not doing. If you do it, the world is completed. If you don't do it, then something remains undone. Therefore, you begin to feel a responsibility, an empathy with the world, because it is a world in which you make a difference. Tomorrow morning, and find that the whole world has become good. Everybody is perfect. There are no more problems. We don't need doctors anymore. Will you feel some sense of accomplishment? That you somehow contributed to this perfection? Or will you stand by like a stranger, surprised by what you see and having no part in it, no share in it? So God says, don't be a stranger, and don't be a passive observer. Be a partner in creation. By being a partner in creation, we have, instead of the shame of having received life as a free gift, which is embarrassing, we have instead a sense of accomplishment because we participated in the growing pains of the world. And that's what it means to be a partner with God in creation. Not a passive, unconscious and unwilling, involuntary part of God's doing. Instead, we become a voluntary, purposeful, and productive partner in the creation. And that gives us a tremendous sense of worth. Not ego, but worth. That's in this world the reward or the benefits of doing that which you were created to do. In the bigger picture, by fulfilling these mitzvahs and these commandments, we are elevating, bringing back together that which has become separated. We say in the davening that one of the biggest mitzvahs, for which there's a reward both in this world and in the world to come, is when you bring peace between people. But more specifically, between a man and his friend, between a husband and a wife. Why the emphasis on a man and his friend? Why not between two strangers? Because two strangers are two strangers. There's no tragedy in that. But when a man and his friend are not getting along, and you can bring peace between them, then you're bringing back together that which had become separated. In other words, bringing back the harmony. in doing the mitzvahs, every mitzvah that we do involves some physical part of the world, some material, as well as some physical part of the body. And within all of these physical things, there is a part of God that had become separated in the act of creation. By doing the mitzvah, we're bringing back, reuniting, rejoining that little divine spark that had become separated from God. We're bringing it back to God again. Or if you want to talk about it in Kabbalistic terms, the male and female aspects of the world are being brought back together. HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shekhinah. Every time we do a mitzvah, we are bringing peace. We're bringing back together the Shekhinah with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Shekhinah is that part of God which was invested into creation. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that part of God that's above creation. And this, although it sounds more mystical, actually gets us closer to our individual lives. All of us were created to perfect the world. Jews do it through 613 commandments. Everybody else does it through 7 commandments. But basically the purpose is the same. To create heaven on earth. To bridge that distance that separates heaven from earth. Or that separates creation from creator. But that is a purpose that all life, human life, shares in common. But what about me as an individual? What is my purpose? Meaning to say, what is the purpose of my being who I am, not just my being alive? And here too, the question is based on an assumption, and the answer has to be based on the assumption. The assumption being that I am what I am, not by accident. Because if it's by accident, so why are you asking what's the purpose? There is no purpose, it's an accident. If I am what I am, for a reason, then I can ask. Then I can search to find that reason. Why am I what I am? Firstly, why am I a Jew? Not what makes me a Jew. We know what makes me a Jew. I have a Jewish mother, which gives me a Jewish soul. But why? What is the more specific purpose of a Jew that is different than the purpose of a non-Jew? So why am I a Jew? What is the purpose of being a Jew? Second question, why am I free? Or in different words, why is it up to me? Why is it my responsibility? To be a Jew is more specific than to be a human being. To be responsible is more specific than to be a slave. A slave means that it's not up to you. No one ever discusses the personality of a slave or the mind of a slave or the opinions of a slave. Why? Because it doesn't matter. His opinion isn't going to change anything. Matter of fact, he doesn't need to have an opinion. He's a slave. And that's what makes being a slave attractive to a slave. He doesn't need to have an opinion. He doesn't need to be responsible. And that's why the Gemara says that you cannot free a slave without asking him. Because he may not want to be free. So why wouldn't anybody want to be free? So because when you're free, you have to have an opinion. And you have to be responsible. Not everybody wants to do that. Better yet, not everybody can do that. If you're given a certain responsibility, what is it that you have that makes you capable of living up to that responsibility? So what is it about you that makes you free and not a slave? So the question becomes more specific. Why am I alive? That's a very general question. Why am I a Jew? More specific. Even more specific. Why am I free? In other words, what am I that makes me capable of being responsible? Because if I am responsible, what am I responsible with? What is it? My mind, my heart, my personality, my sense of accomplishment, my pride, my dignity. What is it? Whatever it is, why do I have it? In other words, if I'm an ambitious person, why am I ambitious? What is the purpose of an ambitious person's life? What if I'm passive? If I find that I'm a passive person, what is the purpose of being passive? If I find that I'm bright, what is my purpose? If I find that I'm dull, what is my purpose? In other words, whatever I am responsible. Well, being what I am, what is my responsibility? If I'm poor, what's my responsibility? If I'm rich, what's my responsibility? In other words, what is the purpose of my being what I am? Rich, poor, smart, weak, important, unimportant, and so on. And that's what we mean by that, by the bracha in the morning, where we say, thank you for making me a free man, for not making me a slave. What's a slave? A slave is a person where rich or poor is irrelevant, smart or stupid is irrelevant, ambitious or not ambitious is irrelevant, passive or aggressive is irrelevant. All of it is irrelevant. He's not responsible either way. So who cares? What does it mean not to be a slave? Not to be a slave means that whatever you are, that's what you are, and you better take responsibility for it. A slave can sit around and say, if I were a rich man, if I were a poor man, if I was smart, if I was... Sure, you can do that all year. But if you're not a slave, you can't do it. Because what do you mean, if I were a rich man? You're not, you're poor. And if you're poor, what is your purpose? So yeah, but what if I was rich? Only a slave has the luxury of saying, if I were. If only. A slave can dream, can wish. If you're not a slave, you can't wish and you can't dream. You are what you are. So what's the responsibility? More specifically, what is my responsibility as a male or as a female? Those are the three specifics within the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to improve the world. More specifically, the purpose of a Jew is to improve that part of the world that only a Jew can affect through the 613 mitzvahs. A non-Jew who puts on tefillin does not elevate the divine spark in the leather. Nothing happens. It's a piece of leather and he's wearing leather boxes. Rather foolish. Even more, if a non-Jew does not work on Shabbos, doesn't do any work on Shabbos, not only isn't he improving the world, he's destroying it. Because his contribution to the world is improving the physical condition of the world. If he takes one day out of the week and says, on this day I will not improve anything in the physical world, it's not only not an improvement, it goes the opposite direction. A day has gone by and he hasn't improved anything. And that's why a non-Jew may do other mitzvahs, but he may not keep Shabbos. Because that means being non-productive for a day out of the week. Because the purpose, the way that a non-Jew perfects the world is different from the way a Jew perfects the world. A Jew accomplishes great things for the world by not working on Shabbos. A non-Jew accomplishes by working on Shabbos. By the way, the folksy image of the Shabbos Goy. That Jews weren't able to light their oven on Shabbos, so they would have their non-Jewish neighbor, they'd call him in and give him a piece of challah and get him to light the oven for them. Or that famous joke about this guy from a shtetl who came to America and he saw all these apartment buildings. He says, who lives there? He said, no, non-Jews. So they go down the street in another apartment building. He said, who lives there? He said, not Jews. Finally, they come to the Jewish section of the neighborhood and he sees over there 3 houses and these are the Jews. He says, wait a minute. If there are only 11 Jews living in the neighborhood, why do you need so many goyim? I mean, how many ovens have to be lit on Shabbos? Because in his shtetl, there were 3 or 4 goyim in the whole shtetl, and they were used for Shabbos. So here he's got the apartment buildings full of goyim, which gives the impression of, the loophole in the law where you can get a non-Jew to do what you're not allowed to do. It's not such a loophole at all. And it's not just that you want your oven lit, so you're going to use a non-Jew to do it. That's not the whole story either. As much as it is a virtue for you not to light the oven on Shabbos, it is a virtue for the non-Jew to do it. Because while we are elevating the world by refraining from the physical, he elevates the world by improving the physical. And if it's cold and the fire is not lit, and he lights it, then he's improved the physical condition of the world. So we need to understand what is our purpose as Jews. We further need to understand what is our purpose as individuals, meaning to say, with the particular personality that we have. And then, the most specific is we need to know what is our role as a man and a woman. And here it's very clear that the difference between the role of a man and a woman has nothing to do with personality, because that was part of the second consideration, not being a slave. Very specifically, we wake up in the morning, like Adam waking up, or Eve waking up after being created. And we find a world, good and bad. We find a world. We find a world into which we are created for that day. We find ourselves surrounded by certain people. We find ourselves bearing a certain personality. We're going to say burdened by a certain personality, but it doesn't necessarily have to be so negative. We find ourselves stuck with a personality that may need to be improved, may even need to be changed. But it's there. This is who we are. This is it. This is the world as far as we're concerned. So there are people in China who are starving? Yes, but I'm not starving. That's not me. There are people in the world who are enlightened, but that's not me. My world does not include that. My world is this room. This is my world. My personality, my gender, my family, my friends, my involvement. This is the world. The question is, what is the purpose of life? It doesn't have to include the cosmos. What is my purpose? What is the purpose of my life does not have to be a philosophical question at all. And it doesn't have to include all of mankind. The purpose of life can very easily mean my life. My life as it is. Therefore, Hasidus says that the expression, the use of the term, if only, is blasphemous. It is blasphemy to say, if only. Because by saying that, you are rejecting the purpose of your condition, the purpose of your gender, the purpose of your personality, and the purpose of your Judaism. And what you're left with is this vague universal concept of purpose of life. But what you want, what you're wishing for, is that you were not the particulars that you are. If only I were different, if only I hadn't done that, if only my mother had chosen someone else, then things would have been different. I heard this woman who wrote to her mother after she came to Beis Chana and found out that you're Jewish if your mother is Jewish. And her mother had married a non-Jewish man. And there had always been some tension in the house and so on. So she wrote to her mother and said, my problem started when you married a non-Jew. And had you not done that, my life would have been much better. It's hard to argue with that because it's such an emotional issue. But the attitude is wrong. If your mother hadn't married a non-Jew, you wouldn't be. Not you would be better off. You wouldn't be at all. Because you are only to be what you are. If not to be this, then you wouldn't be at all. God does not create faceless people and then fate, whatever that means, paints a face on you. You're born with your face. You are created with your face. You were meant to be born to the parent you were born to, and not any way else. And if your mother hadn't married your father, even though he's not Jewish, you would not be. And therefore to say, if only, then I would be. No, if only you wouldn't be. You're here only under the conditions in which you find yourself. Other conditions and you're not. Therefore, when a person says, if I had been wiser when I was young, life would have come out differently. It's not true. It would have been nice to be wise when you're young. Not because life would have come out differently, but maybe you would have handled it better. But it would have been the same. Obviously, if this is your life, then this is the way it had to be. If you are wise, then you can handle it. If you're not wise, then you run in circles. But your life remains what it is. So, when a person says, if only the world would be different, then it's blasphemy. Because the world is the way God wants it to be. To say, if only I was born with a different head, or with a different heart, or with a different personality, is blasphemy. God wants you this way. It is not a mistake. And to say, if only I had married someone else, if only I had had some other children, not these children, if only I hadn't had children, if only I had had more children, if only is blasphemy. Because your gender, and therefore your husband or your wife and your children, are as they're meant to be. The question is only, what is the purpose? But not if only. So to say that I had a bad set of parents and they messed up my life, and therefore I am a victim of circumstance, that's not a circumstance. That's a divine cosmic plan. And yes, it would. What is it, the line there in Tevye? Would it spoil some vast eternal plan? Yes, it would. Because it's not circumstances. Secondly, no matter how much freedom of choice we have, we remain, to a large extent, victims of our circumstance. In other words, we cannot do away with the circumstances. We can only change our reaction or response to it. If our reaction is a helpless one, then we can correctly call it a victim of circumstance. If our response is a positive one, then yes, we are reacting to our circumstance and living within our circumstance. But we're not victims. We're taking responsibility. So will that change it? No, it may not change it. Because the circumstances are there for keeps. I was once arguing with this woman about freedom of choice. And she was saying that the only virtue in life is the ability to handle your problems, to solve your problems, not handle, solve your problems. And that's it. If you can't solve your problems, then religion is a crutch and it's the opiate of the masses, and because it keeps you from solving your problems, and you accept your problems, and you're a victim, and being a mensch means that you solve your problems. This woman was about 6'2". And I said to her, "What are you doing about your problem?" There was very little she could do. Very little. Matter of fact, there is nothing she could do about her problem. So what she was doing was she was accepting it graciously most of the time. So he says, "Well, I'm handling it." I said, "What do you mean you're handling it? What are you doing? You're shrinking slowly? What do you mean you're handling it?" Obviously, there's nothing you can do to solve your problem. The circumstances are there for keeps. What are you going to do? You're going to live with it. You're going to accept the circumstances and not try to change it and somehow live with it. And that's why you're not a victim of it. Yeah, that's correct. But to say that the only way to be a mensch is by solving your problem, most problems are not solvable. You can either live by them, with them, off them, or die from them, but they're not solvable. Because they're not accidents. An accident you can wipe up. But that which God ordained for us doesn't get wiped up. We either thrive on it or we're overburdened by it. So I'm not talking about silly things, about imaginary problems that can be wiped up and dismissed, but real circumstances, life's circumstances. To wish them away is silly, and to say if only is blasphemous, and to refuse to take responsibility is being a victim, and therefore we're left with only one choice. And that is to say, this is how God made me, now what is my responsibility? What is my purpose? So if a person wakes up one morning, regardless of how it came to be, he wakes up one morning and he finds that he's seriously ill. What should he do? Regret being born? Say if only? What he has to do is say, this is my world. When you wake up in the morning, it's like Adam opening his eyes. He had nothing to do with the world that preceded him. And therefore, he certainly could not say if only. If only what? If only I had made different choices. He made no choices at all. The world, the Garden of Eden, was what it was without his input. And that one tree that you were not allowed to eat from, he didn't make it non-kosher. It was not kosher for some reason. He had nothing to do with it. And he opens his eyes, and there are kosher trees, and there's a non-kosher tree. In other words, there's good things and there's bad things. And that's it. That's the world. Take it or leave it. The same is true every morning when we get up. So when we say, what is the purpose of life? We're not talking about a universal concept. We're talking about tomorrow morning. And what is life? Whatever you find when you open your eyes, that's life. And that life has a purpose. And you have to find out what that purpose is. And that's what it means by Avraham, where it says that Avraham grew old, he came in days. Which is another way of saying that he got old. But more specifically, what it means is that every day of his long life had served a purpose. And so that when he got old, he could come before God with all his days. They hadn't slipped through his fingers. They were his. He came to old age with his days. They hadn't drifted away on him. He hadn't wished them out of existence by saying, if only. Whatever the day presented, that's what Avraham lived with. And so by the time he came to old age, he came with many days that he had lived through, not survived. Because every time you open your eyes in the morning, there's the world, there is life, there's the cosmic question of the purpose of life, but all focused on this one day in the conditions that the day presents to you. You wake up in the morning and you're determined to be better today than you were yesterday. Better, more moral. That's all. More intelligent? Who knows? More courageous? I don't know. More ambitious? I don't know. The procrastinator who is absolutely determined to stop procrastinating tomorrow. So you can go through your life saying, I will not procrastinate. I will never again procrastinate. And you get to be 80 and you find that you've procrastinated your whole life away because you were busy not procrastinating. So that may never change. Of course, if it's really within your personality to get things done, and you've been procrastinating simply because you're in a bad mood, or because you're careless, or lackadaisical, and so on, that's part of morality. So if you kick yourself in the pants in the morning and say, I've got to stop being such a mess, and you find that you succeed, then obviously it's within your personality to get things done. It just takes a little morality. But if it's really not within your personality, then it may never change. You've got to live with that. Because there's nothing immoral, intrinsically immoral, about being shlomazel. It's no great honor either, but it's not a sin. And the same with poverty. You may never get out of poverty, and there's no sin to be poor. So, are you poor because you're irresponsible? Are you poor because you're malicious? If yes, then it's a moral problem. And that you have to change. You have to fix it. So you wake up in the morning and you're determined to be better today than you were yesterday, but not necessarily different. Not even in terms of personality things. So knowing what you can't change is a necessary thing, but it remains unchangeable. And if you can't change it, then you have to have the wisdom to know that and to live accordingly. So it's not that every day is going to be the same as the day before. It's not going to be the same. It's got to be better. But the only way that the day is different is in its morality. The Torah tells us or describes for us what a certain condition is by comparing it to the opposite. How do we understand the world now that Adam and Eve did eat from the tree of knowledge? By comparing it to what would have been if they hadn't. But not that we're wishing they hadn't. There's no wishing. If we all kept Shabbos, Mashiach would come. That's not a wish. There's not, if only last Shabbos we would have kept Shabbos. I'm not talking about last Shabbos, I'm talking about next Shabbos. And that's not a wish. Or when the Rebbe said, the previous Rebbe said that after World War II, Mashiach was ready to come. The world was ready for Mashiach, and we blew it. That's not, if only we hadn't blown it then. It's not wishful thinking. It's describing the condition. So in each situation, the question is, what does God want of me now? The consistent, stable, general purpose is to fulfill the mission. You're a messenger. And as a messenger, your thing, your purpose, your responsibility is to fulfill the shlichus, to carry out the mission. But it's not It's not a static mission. Like we find with Avram. One day God wanted him to do kindness and feed people in the desert and teach them about godliness. The next day he wanted him to offer his son up as a sacrifice. So which was it? What was his purpose? Was his purpose to feed people, or was his purpose to offer sacrifices? All of it. All of it. His purpose was to accomplish whatever God sent him out to do. What did God send him out to do? A lot of things. That's why he lived to be 175, I think. Yeah? Something like that. So if we live to be 80 or 90, obviously we've got 80 years worth of stuff to do. And it's not the same thing over and over and over. It's sometimes under these circumstances, under those circumstances, and so on. Given this purpose, and given an enthusiasm about the purpose, we become, literally, without exaggeration, we become indestructible. Again, going to Russia for an example. The Jews in Russia today, who are the refuseniks and the Balchuvas, who are becoming observant, who are studying, I was just reading an article by Steinsaltz, the author from Israel, and he published a number of volumes of the Gemara. He's in the process of doing the entire Gemara. But he's published, I think, 16 volumes of Gemara, in which he adds his own commentary. In addition to Rashi, he also adds his own commentary, explaining words that are difficult and unfamiliar to people, and giving diagrams and explaining some. And in this article, he was talking about how many requests he has gotten for his Gemaras from Russia. But the Talmud itself, in Hebrew, is in big demand in Russia. And that people sit there and study his Gemara, because they know a little bit of modern Hebrew. So his commentary, which is written in modern Hebrew, helps them understand the Gemara. So they sit studying the Gemara for hours on end in Russia. So now, to think that a person can be so immersed and so devoted and so stubborn about their Yiddishkeit and about learning, not only Chumash but also Gemara or Tanya, whatever it is that they're learning there, while at the same time they have enough issues in their personal lives and their private lives to preoccupy two people full time. If we had the problems they had, God forbid, we would have no time for anything else. We would be so absorbed and so preoccupied with surviving that we wouldn't manage to accomplish anything else. And then halavai we should succeed in surviving. We probably wouldn't even accomplish that. We'd collapse. We'd get depressed. We'd give up, commit suicide. Who knows what we'd do? Here, there are people who have enough issues and enough problems and enough worries and enough concerns and enough aches and pains to be totally preoccupied with them. And they're not. They're totally preoccupied with Yiddishkeit. It's like they're capable of two lives at the same time when we're not even capable of one. But this is the secret of Jewish survival. The enthusiasm that we have when we're seeing things clearly, the enthusiasm we have for the purpose in life, makes the problems in life insignificant. And that which would destroy other nations doesn't faze us. We're busy. We have no time to be destroyed because we're busy with our purpose. Problems, danger, suffering, illness, poverty, anti-Semitism, oppressions of all sorts, they're not pleasant. But then again, we're busy. The Romans are destroying Yerushalayim, and what are people thinking? Where are we going to learn next year? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai smuggles himself out and he starts a yeshiva. While Yerushalayim is being burnt to the ground, he's negotiating a yeshiva in Yavne. Other people would curl up and die. Nations, I mean. This nation is busy. Our world is being destroyed, and our country is being burnt, and our temple is being overrun. And what are we busy with? What are we going to learn next year? And so the temple gets destroyed, but the Jewish people go on. And that's been the case every time there's been trouble. And in our personal lives, the same is true. When we're busy with our purpose, then we can't be bothered with our pains, with our pettiness. And the more enthusiastic we are about our purpose, the more quickly the pains and the difficulties dissipate. They go away, and long after they're gone, we're still here. And that's going to be the case anyway. So there's this famous story about the previous Rebbe's uncle, who many had considered a Rebbe in his own right. So he was an incredible person. One day, word spread that his forest had burnt down. So some of his friends rushed over to his house to see if they could console him and be there with him in his time of need. His life savings just went down the drain. They got to his house and they found him reading. And they figured that he hadn't heard yet. So they weren't sure whether they should tell him or they shouldn't tell him, how they should break the news to him, and so on and so forth. Finally, they hemmed and they hawed and they broke the news to him, and he knew. He had heard an hour ago. They said, "What do you mean you heard an hour ago? We walked in here, you were sitting here casually reading a book as if nothing happened. Weren't you upset?" He says, "Of course I was upset." They said, "But when we walked in, you were reading. He said, "That was an hour later." So they were standing there gaping at him. He said, "What are you so surprised about?" And he turned to one of them and he said, "How come you're not upset?" He said, "About what?" He said, "About your kid." He said, "What about my kid?" He says, "Your kid is very not well." So what are you talking about? That was 3 years ago. He says, "Well, why aren't you upset?" He says, "I was upset, but I've gotten over it. That was 3 years ago." He says, "Okay, so by you it takes 3 years. By me it takes an hour. So I'm faster than you." And then he went on to say, if you know that 3 years from now you won't be upset anymore, so why be upset now? A problem that's going to go away anyway isn't worth worrying over. It's the problems that don't go away you worry about. But if you know that this is only for 10 years, it's only for 10 years, no, not so terrible. And if its maximum life is 10 years, why have to go to the maximum? Go to the minimum. Nobody in the whole world would be upset for more than 10 years over a fire. So I have to be the worst guy in the world and wait the whole 10 years. Do the full time. Get away with less. So if we know that in the end it's going to end up the same anyway, in the end it's going to be the way God wants anyway, then the option is only whether you're going to aggravate yourself over it and agonize over it for 10 years, or you'll leave yourself alone and be busy with other things. Focus on the purpose in life and stop focusing on. So our eyes have this nasty tendency of wandering off to where we shouldn't be looking. If we're busy with our purpose, then we don't notice and we don't get excited about the things that we shouldn't get excited about. So the purpose of life is to keep our eyes where they belong, to keep ourselves focused on the right thing. And that way we don't get off on tangents. We don't get stuck in ruts, and we don't get distracted by unkosher things or unhappy things or ungodly things. And as one Rebbe once put it, if there's something scaring you, it's only to remind you that you need to be afraid of God. So be afraid of God and you won't need the reminder. So if we keep focused on our purpose, then we don't need the things that come along to remind us of that purpose and to poke us and wake us and to so on and so on. If we're focused, then we don't need the rest of the stuff.